You shall bind them as a sign on your hand, and they shall be as frontlets between your eyes. Deuteronomy 6:8 ESV. Let's talk about the four testaments, the Bible. I know we're typically think of two, but I think we might do better. Let's talk about first of the structure of what we call the New Testament. We have basically two kinds of literature. We have Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, and I would say Acts. Why Acts, you ask? Well, it's Luke part 2, so we could just put it there. Matthew, Mark, Luke, Acts, and John. Then we have letters, also known as epistles, which is the Greek word for letters. All the rest of the so-called books of the New Testament. Of course, they're not books, they're letters, but well, what can I say? So we have these letters, and then we can see them as two kinds of literature: histories and primary source documents. Perhaps you've seen a two-volume history of America where you have what happened is written by an author on the one volume, and then the second volume is has the Constitution, the Declaration of Independence. That's kind of what we have here. So, for example, Luke writes of Paul's journeys, and then we have Paul's letters written during his journeys. So we see this pattern in the Old Testament too. Let's start with the book of Judges. That's the story about the judges ruling over Israel. It's a book that's written several hundred years after the book of Joshua, the previous book. So there's kind of this break. Then this is written probably by Samuel. It deals with some of his issues, and then Ruth is written also by Samuel, and the book of Samuel by Samuel and his successors. Now it's First and Second Samuel, but that's really just means they didn't fit on one scroll, so it's one book. Kings, the same thing. And this is about, we have David and Solomon as primary or important characters in these two books, Samuel and Kings. Well, they wrote stuff. David wrote the Psalms. Samuel says he could play the harp. Samuel says he could sing. Psalms are the songs he constructed, he crafted, that he wrote. Mostly by David. Asaph, who's a contemporary David, mentioned in Samuel and Kings. So, all right. Then we have also Solomon wrote Proverbs, and then we have them. Kings didn't give us many of them, or any of them, I don't think, but Proverbs gives them to us. Those are them. Also, Solomon wrote, mostly by Solomon. There's a few others in the collection, but Ecclesiastes is written by Solomon. Song of Solomon. Job is a little bit different. It's an older story, but it seems to be rewritten for this time period. We call these four books wisdom literature. So just remember that. Now, oddly, in our Bibles, Job is put before Psalms, and I'm not sure why that happened, but we'll just let it go for now. In any case, at the end of Kings, we have the exile. So we have this long period, and then we have Chronicles. Now, Chronicles overlaps the content of Samuel and Kings, but it's written, it takes you through the return from exile. And even at the beginning of the book, it mentions people returning from exile. It has some genealogies in the beginning. So it's written afterwards. Chronicles ends and Ezra begins. In fact, the ending of one, the beginning of the other overlap. You had Ezra about the rebuilding the temple, Nehemiah, Esther about God's people being a province in the empire. So there's a different situation. The first situation before the exile is a kingdom. The second situation is exile, and then the return from exile, they're in the province. Now, overlapping the stuff in Chronicles, we got the major prophets. Now, some of these could possibly go in the first category or the previous collection because, for instance, Second Kings mentions Isaiah, one of the major prophets. But most of them pretty certainly belong below here. The same thing with the minor prophets. The minor prophets takes you from before exile to after exile and beyond. And the minor prophets are almost certainly one book. It seems that Stephen refers to them as the book of the prophets when he's speaking before the Sanhedrin in Acts chapter 7. In any case, even if these are not perfect collections as I've diagrammed them here, they're mostly right. Maybe one or two prophets goes up with the kings, but certainly this mostly works. So my point here is that you have basically Gospels and letters in the Old Testament. Okay? Gospels are histories, letters are about what happened or what is happening during history, samples of it. So that's what you've got. And you also notice you've got the order of the books in our table of contents from Judges through Malachi, the last of the minor prophets. History first, primary sources then second. What do we add the first 6 books? All right, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, Joshua. I would argue that they form a pattern of Old Testament, New Testament in a sense, but they are the First Testament. They all come together. They're a collection. Talk about the taking of the land from the time of creation. Then we have, a few hundred years before Samuel writes, and there we have the four testaments of the Bible. First Testament is Genesis through Joshua. Second Testament is kingdom histories, and with the Psalms and wisdom literature as the primary source documents, Gospels, and then letters. Third Testament, empire history, Chronicles, Ezra, Nehemiah, Esther, and we have the prophets. Okay, Gospels and letters. Fourth Testament, of course, Gospels and letters. Now, the last testament is the final, and it's important. It has the story of Jesus, which is the culmination of everything. But still, the way we kind of treat Old Testament, New Testament, it's like we've got this great mystery novel, and all we want people to read is the last chapter. And the last chapter is important, but it won't be properly understood without the rest. And one way to understand that is to not see everything previous to the Gospels as just being one thing. It's actually got a pretty nuanced history, and it easily breaks up into three previous testaments. So I hope you'll find it helpful. We'll do more with that in later videos, but I thought you'd need this for background and for your own studies. See you next time.